This video gives my most recent views on how science links to commerce and society in the case of medicine. The sources for the work are here and include my granddaughter, shown in this, I think, rather lovely picture. So society is just everybody, everything. And out here is nature, the two great poles that this work exists between. And society has been afflicted with disease from the beginning, as far as everyone knows. Now, by disease, I mean displacement from the normative trajectory. That sounds very forbidding, but almost anyone will know when they're no longer feeling normal or seeming normal. And although the definition appears so technical, it is in a way a convenience, sort of definition that makes separating disease from health more straightforward. And more or less since the beginning of known human societies, there have been people set apart to stand between us and disease. Currently, it's a profession of medicine, and the purpose of the work in medicine is to separate one disease from another, diagnosis, to look ahead, prognosis, what will happen, and to provide treatments of three kinds: prevention, cure, and palliation. And that's pretty straightforward. On the other side is another ring, is the great circulation of society, production and commerce. People who run that essentially are business people, professionals. And I don't have to say any more about this. It's more or less the structure of society's functioning. Now, medicine relates to society in part through production and commerce, because physicians, whether in a private office or in a corporation, as well as other professionals, charge for their services and are paid for them. In addition, they reach out into the individual. And so the medical profession relates to society in two separate ways. The scientists are out here with nature, and they're all about new knowledge. And that new knowledge comes in three flavors: inventions, the reasons why things in nature are the way they are, causes of things, and facts about the real world as it is. Now, scientists relate to professions of medical people through education. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Scientists can educate the doctors without passing through some kind of commercial or production. But that's not true. The medical education structure is commercial. The journals, the books, the fancy websites, they're all paid for. They're all run mostly for profit. And so, in fact, the scientists educate the medical professions through the means of production and commerce. Now, the scientists relate to production and commerce in another way, which is invention. Invention is to reshape what's in the world, to do the things we want to do. And that's distributed by the means of production and commerce. In the case of medicine, there are only two things that are invented and produced: tests and treatments. And then, as a sort of special thing for the scientists, they're the instruments and the reagents that scientists use for their own work. And I suppose if if you think about the tests in medicine often being big machines, it's the instruments and reagents used to create the tests and treatments. Now, this is a fairly complete view of how it works. You might say it's on the schematic side. Why the colors? Because this talk will contain a lot of separations of one thing or another. I've used blue for actions, things that are done. I've used white for the names of things and for facts, and names of things being tests and treatments and so forth. I've used yellow for the new knowledge that is sought by scientists or the objectives that are sought by physicians on behalf of their patients. And that's going to hold true throughout. Now, I want to sort of recapitulate what I just said. On the one hand, there is professional science. On the other hand, there is professional commerce. The two come together through the production of tests and treatments and the production of companies that will produce these tests and treatments, often small, that begin from a test or a treatment and go out into the marketplace. When they come together, they create what I call a unique public good. Now, this unique public good is essentially a new test or treatment that has become available for people in general through the engine of commerce. And it has become available in the first place through the skills and peculiar abilities of professional scientists. To understand professional commerce, one has to look at the entirety of a curriculum for business people. It's an entire profession, and the materials for it are found in whole curricula. This course aims a little bit, this lecture, a little bit at the linking part, and a lot, if you like. That's why I kind of emphasize a lot when it comes to professional science. And there's nothing I have to say about professional business. All right, there's a blank screen here to kind of pause before moving on to a new level of complexity. And here is that new level. How does scientific research work, and what is it? Well, it begins immediately with the blue box. It's to search in a scientific manner. I underline key words here. And what are you searching for? Well, we already did this, new knowledge, but we're doing the case of medicine. And so that's new knowledge that people need. And here's a little axiom of my own. If people need it, you should be able to say who needs it, how will it benefit them, and how much. So in the case of medicine, you're searching for new knowledge that people need. The term of art is the objective of the research, and it's always a noun, because you're searching for a thing, something that's real. There are three flavors of this real knowledge. Facts about the world as it is, empiricism. It's in white because it's facts. You imagine what might be there, and then you go out and measure. A way we can do something in blue, you imagine it and you make it and see if it does it. About nature, how nature does things, how nature brings about the facts of the world as it is, you imagine it, then you test predictions of the imagined idea to see if they work. Three completely different kinds of goals. And now red, which is showing up here for the first time, is for the one thing you are never going to see up close. You're always going to infer and imagine it. Okay, so that's the new knowledge people need. In the case of medicine, we pretty much have some idea how that's going to work, and we haven't said much about scientific matter yet. So let's do that. The work meets professional norms. In other words, it's a profession. Science is a profession. And the actions that we're going to take to achieve the new knowledge are verbs, and they're called specific aims. An aim. It's going to be a proposed action. Specific to what? Specific to the new knowledge. In between is another imagining, that quality of mind that lets you imagine how the things you know to do link to the things you want in such a way as to have a plausible chance of success. These aims are in two baskets: techniques, that's skills, and recipes, that's methods. Now, the little box says something I think is useful. An objective is scientifically valid to the extent that aims for its fulfillment are professionally sound. I think that's rather good. All right. So now we have a fairly complete structure. Only a little bit is left to say. Tools like to be used. Brand new omic, a new transcriptome of a more elegant kind than ever before. Let's use it. For what? Well, let's use it. It's going to be exciting. Editors will publish it. We'll get a paper. That's not science. That's something else. And if I sound like I'm inveighing against it, I am. On the other side, there's what I have to call the ladder of objectives. It's all imagined. I want a cure for this lymphoma. If I can get these two regulatory molecules straight and how they link and how their linkage changes gene expression, then I might work out where in that chain one could alter things without utterly upsetting and damaging the function of normal cells. And if I could get that part straight, I might be able to find in there some places where drugs might aim. And then if that works, we might be able to get a candidate drug. So 3 ifs. And this is the general rule. You rarely go straight to your final objective in the case of medicine. You kind of ladder your way up from one detail to another, basically one successful objective to another, till you get to where you want to go. And this is all imagined. That's what the green is for. Why is it green? Why did I choose green for the imagination? Well, because of this. You have to put the blue aims together with the yellow objectives, and the two make green. So I made it green. Now, when you're all done, you publish your work. And the purpose of publication, besides making it available, is to permit verification. And this is all part of the profession. This isn't ordinary writing. It's a special kind of writing that professional scientists know how to do. Thomas Kuhn gave us some wonderful insights into the profession of science. Any one scientist has about 10 or 20 to up to 100 peers around the world. They share theories, research needs, methods, techniques, and paradigms. Paradigms being recent and successful outcomes of their work around which they are currently doing new experiments and working away. Here's a picture of Thomas Kuhn. And I think it's a nice insight to give some thought to. All right, so we've talked about the links between medicine, commerce, and society, and science, and I've given you a fairly good introduction to the interior structure of science. Let's take it a step further. Empirical research. That's all in white, as you see. It is gathering verifiable facts from the world as it is. All this is underlined, verifiable facts from the world as it is. You mustn't change the world as you measure it. This is a little nicety about where facts, the word fact, comes from. So what are facts? Measurements. No matter how you twist and turn, ultimately it's measurement. And they're made in a scientific manner, and I already said what that is. And it's from a sample of the objective world. You can't do the world. You make a sample. And the objective world means not subjective. And as it is, we already said. If you do it in a sample that you've specified and in a scientific manner from the world as it is, it can be verified by someone else who uses your measurements, gathers a sample the way you did, and does what you did. They should be able to show that what you did is true. And that's how science actually gets its facts. Well, what do you do with all those facts when you're all done? Well, it's the groundwork for theory, and it's the groundwork for invention. You can't theorize about causes of things unless you know what things are, and you can't invent out of nature unless you know what's in nature. So it's basic to everything. And then facts can be used with empirical axiom of cause, which is present in every mystery story. If A is not before B, and if A does not accompany B, A doesn't cause B. Like, for example, somebody is found dead. She wasn't there before he was killed, and she wasn't there when he was killed. So she's really not a suspect. This is a very powerful axiom. It allows you to make a net that will exclude things using just empirical data. And empiricism brings up the problem of naming. When you measure something that's in the real world as it is, it's a thing. And it has a name. And a thing is a set of certain facts. So the name is the name of a thing which is a set of certain facts. One can easily see how this discussion rapidly goes into a set theory, and I don't intend to pursue it any further. When you're all done, you publish it. We've already done that already. Why green again? Well, I want to make clear, nobody who's sane goes out into the real world to gather verifiable facts unless they have a very strong empirical hypothesis. Something particular or specific will be found, and it is of value. And value in the case of medicine has already been defined. Value to people. So there is a hypothesis for all empirical research. And the idea of non-empirical, atheoretic empiricism is a form of madness. Now, here's the imaginations that I've mentioned put out before you in a slide of its own, just to say it again. There are three kinds of imaginings concerning the objectives of research. Something of value is there. This will do what we want if we build it. Nature does it this way. A kind of predictive imagination concerning what is present in nature and what nature will allow you to do with it. Then there is an imagination about what actions will happen here. These objectives, goals, nouns, that's what we want. These aims, these acts are available to me. The particular set of actions that I've imagined here will achieve the goal. From my whole repertory, I've chosen a suite of actions that I believe will achieve this goal. That's imagined. We never did this before, because if we did this before, we'd already have the objective. And then, of course, the ladder of objectives. That's really imagining, indeed. This objective, this I to J set of objectives will reach the final objective. That's imagined. 3 kinds of imagining. And I think there are probably more. It's just that this is all I could come up with in my 2024 version of this talk. All right. Now let's return to new knowledge people need and remind ourselves it comes in the 3 flavors, the 3 colors, and the imaginings. Much broader context can be formulated, not the context within science, but the context within society. And in the broadest possible sense, society, humans in general, are interested in what is there. And they're interested in the causes of things. So scientists have always been supported, partly because they want ways of doing things, yes, but partly because people are a curious lot. They put their money up so that scientists can learn about what is there and what causes what is there. And they do it in a general sense, and I'm showing that to you. In showing it to you, I'm showing you something that might not have been easily suspected. The way to do things show up in both domains. And that's obvious. The methods and techniques are all inventions. And there's bidirectionality here. Because as we learn more about what is there and what causes what is there, we can invent more. And this creates more knowledge. And so it bootstraps. The whole system bootstraps itself. Through what? Mainly through the engine of invention. It is no coincidence that the Industrial Revolution of the long 19th century corresponds with the greatest advances in scientific knowledge in the history of humankind. Of course it will. You have instruments, you have reagents, you have ways of doing things, and they gradually lead you on to a deeper sense of causes and what is there. Now our purpose here is the case of medicine. Commerce, I should have mentioned before I launched out. Yes, commerce is always playing a key role. In the case of medicine, the focus is on the diseases. Why the diseases? Because that's what people know they have. That's why people have created the world of medicine, to help them with their diseases, which is where we started. The arrow goes all the way through here because one makes inventions related to the diseases, and one looks for causes, and one looks for what is there. This is a quite striking picture. I rather like it. And I think it is food for thought. Maybe some of you who look at this could expand the ideas. I think they're pretty good. All right, what about the diseases? Well, every disease is a named thing, and it has empirical, theoretical, and inventional components. The most obvious thing about any disease is its manifestations, and that's pure facts. The statement of a subjective illness in words, the physical findings, and I'm not going to read all this. Anything that deviates from the norm, in the blood, the organs, the tissues, the cells, the DNA, the RNA, the proteome, the metabolome, the transcriptome, the ohm, any ohm ever between now and the end of the world make up the manifestational structure of a particular named entity called a disease. It's a thing, and it's known by its measurement set. Just like I said, it's true for everything else in nature. Certain empirical statements, facts, are pulled to the left side and say to be the cause, the etiology. I gave 5 that are certainly causes: infection, trauma, genes, alcohol abuse, and obesity. 5 causes, but one could make very much longer lists. And the empirical causes are said to produce the manifestations, and that's through a set of theories about how nature works, called pathogenesis, and it's where drugs often fit. To give you an example of this, consider extreme obesity gives rise to insulin resistance. The muscle cells, glucose transporters, don't respond properly to insulin, and the blood glucose and the insulin are out of sync with each other. The blood sugar is too high and glycates proteins. Is this true? Yeah, hemoglobin A1C. Is this true? Of course, you can look at insulin-glucose relationships, yes. High urine albumin can occur. Well, that may be glycation of the proteins in the glomerular filter. Is that true? Well, it may be. There can be glycation there. Maybe that is the cause. Maybe not. The systolic pressure often goes up. Well, that's because the kidneys are involved. Well, maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's something else causing it. The wall of the left ventricle thickens. Well, the pressure volume integral went up, and when muscles work harder, the muscle gets bigger. Is that the only reason? Well, people think it could be hormones. People think it could be from work. People think lots of things. All of that is embedded in the theory of cause. And so the map, if you like, the structure of a disease, and I haven't really dealt with obesity here except in a micro sketch, is like this. It's a wide-ranging collection. And it has its invention, its tests and its treatments. The tests are to detect, quantify, and diagnose, separate this one disease from another. The treatments are to prevent, cure, and palliate, and the two together give you a sense of what's going to happen. And they're aimed at the manifestations, the theory, and the presumed cause. All of them. Now, scientists are forever making up possible new tests and treatments. And from time to time, some of them reach the stage where they're going to be tried in humans. At this point, in the ideal case, trialists step in and conduct a trial. They are not ordinary people. They're specialized statisticians who work on the design of trials. Much of the time it fails, and there's nothing more to say. But here and there, the trial is successful. The test or the treatment does what it is asked to do. And when that happens, we have a unique public good. Well, what do? We have a unique public good. Well, we certainly publish it. And that publication is good. It brings you some recognition. It would bring you money for your laboratory. It's a good thing. The educational structures of medicine take it on. Now, those structures are always at work. All kinds of new knowledge is flowing from in the empirical realm, the theoretical realm, the manifestational realm, into the educational portals and coming back into medicine to enrich our knowledge of disease. This is constantly going on. This new item comes in, and someone sees to it through education that the portal tells doctors how the new thing works and what it adds. And that's a nice kind of summary of how science and medicine work together for the benefit of patients. In addition, in order to get this thing out into the world, some company or other will take on the work of manufacturing this new treatment or test at scale, and through the medium of commerce, which means they're paid for it, will distribute it in the society. And it is precisely at this linkage, exactly here, that commerce links to medicine and science, right here. The little note at the bottom here is worth looking at. I propose that clinical research is clinical because its objectives arise out of prevailing disease constructs. I propose that. I believe it's worthy of debate. I hope it is debated. It's an excellent idea. Now I want to give an example. It's an example I have used in past versions of this talk, but I'm using it here in a more exacting way. And so those of you who may have heard me before, stick around. The way in which I formulate what happens is strongly influenced by this fellow, Karl Popper, and he proliferated it in this wonderful book, Logic of Scientific Discovery. The first 50 to 100 pages are quite accessible. Beyond that, I find it difficult. Popper is in the lineage of these very, very great contributors to science: Bacon, Hume, Kant, Wittgenstein, Russell, Kripke, and I think Quine belongs here too. These are all working on what's called epistemology. I've put a little small text here. You can stop the video and look at it if you wish. Now I want to show a real objective. I want to show its progression through science out into the popular world, through the commerce and so forth. And it's an objective of such magnitude and a success of such magnitude. It deserves a central place, and I'm giving it one. After World War II, there was a massive outbreak of cardiovascular disease in America. And government wanted, and society wanted, to reduce cardiovascular disease. The scientific community easily translated that we need treatments to reduce cardiovascular disease. And the scientific establishment worked off of the disease construct as they had it. The disease construct at that time, I'm limiting myself just to the area germane to what was done at that time, looked like this. In white, this is empiricism. Age leads to stiffening and narrowing of blood vessels. That was widely known by empiricism. Stiffness raises the systolic blood pressure. That was by physical insights into a stiffening conduit, given that the circulation is a pulsatile flow in a viscoelastic system. And incidentally, systolic blood pressure was known to rise with age. The narrowing was thought to reduce flow to the brain, heart, kidneys, etc., promote stroke, heart attack, etc. And high systolic pressure was thought to force the blood through narrow vessels. The diastolic pressure was known to fall with age, more or less leaving systolic pressure as the main driver of mean pressure. It was also known that in younger people, high diastolic pressure associated with vessel damage, stroke, kidney failure, and heart attack. And it led to the theory that in that age group, high diastolic pressure per se damaged the vessels and caused stroke, kidney failure, heart attack, etc. Now, Popper's view of all that is that this is an all statement. That means it's how nature does things. It's all the time this way, because it's in nature, the real world, even though we only think it up. The all statement here is diastolic pressure greater than normal leads to cardiovascular disease. If that's true, then it must be true that this singular statement will be true. Lowering diastolic pressure less than or equal to normal must, that's why they're red, reduce cardiovascular disease as measured empirically. This if-then statement is the modus tollens. It's one of the medieval logical structures. It translates imagination into measurement. It translates the realm of the imagination into the realm of the senses. This work was performed, and it is an interim objective, just like I talked about the ladder of objectives. Measure cardiovascular disease with or without drugs to lower diastolic pressure. It led to a trial, and the exclamation point was, yes, it was true, 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 which leads to the real objective: get more drugs to lower diastolic pressure through invention and proliferate them, which I didn't bother to say. Simply do what you wanted to do. When this was planned in the 40s, everyone knew it was never going to be adequate, because a majority of cardiovascular disease wasn't in 20 to 45-year-old people. It was in much older people. And we knew they didn't have high diastolic pressure. When I say we, I wasn't here then to do work, but I'm including us looking back at them. And they knew more was needed. And the American Heart Institute, the National Heart Institute, was created in part out of an urgency about heart disease. And one of the first things they did was try to move forward in this problem. The man they chose to move it forward is this guy, Thomas Royal Dauber. Here's his very brief bio, a picture of him I found on the web. He came up with something so compelling, so brilliant, so astonishing really, that they backed him and let him do the study. And this town, Framingham, Massachusetts, was excited enough to back him as well. And they voted in their town council, and the people voted with their feet to participate in the work that he basically originated and carry out what we now know as the Framingham study. And everybody knows about the Framingham study. But it was at that time brand new. So here's Dauber's, as far as I can tell, first public utterance of his extraordinary insight. The publication, and there's a link here. You can follow the link and read it. The actual presentation was a little before the publication, in 1950 at this meeting. This is what Dauber wrote. The first thing he wrote was that epidemiology doesn't just concern infectious disease. That's not enough of an insight that I would trouble you with it. He quotes this fellow, Wade Hampton Frost, whose bio is noted below. And Frost said epidemiology includes the orderly arrangement of facts into chains of inference, which extend more or less beyond the bounds of direct observation. What's he talking about? Chains of inference. The only thing I can think of that he could mean would be the empirical axiom of cause. He didn't say that. I did. This led Dauber, or maybe it was a reason that Dauber uttered the few words which gave rise to everything. As a working hypothesis, he said, it is assumed, he assumed, that these diseases, cardiovascular diseases, do not each have a single cause, but that they are the result of multiple causes which work slowly within the individual. Causes which work slowly within the individual. 7 words. What's that mean? Why is that so brilliant? Rosemarie is fine. She's 25 years old. She runs every day. She's perfectly healthy. But within her, causes are working which will slowly bring about cardiovascular disease. It is not the worm in the rose. It's the rose. This is actually a fabulous insight. No one had ever thought about it before. Well, once you have that insight, what are you going to do? Well, you study populations of normal composition, including the sick and the well. And what are your specific aims? Well, they're clear as crystal. Do all the tests you know how to do and define a bunch of people who are normal with respect to cardiovascular disease. That's what normals mean. They don't have it. Watch them. Some of them will get sick. Some of them won't. Once you get enough of those getting sick and those who didn't, look to see what facts differed between them. When they were well, facts, factors, facts that act, actors, factors, facts. Pure empiricism. Facts are factors because they're presumed to have acted slowly within the individual and brought about the disease. That gave rise to the whole thing. Now, I want to lay this out in the schema that I've already presented to you with my color coding to be sure I've made the point, because it's crucially important to anyone who wants to think about science in the case of medicine. They want the cause of cardiovascular disease. They want more of them. That's a societal objective. Big deal. The imagination is Dauber's brilliant insight. Okay, and therefore he's using the empirical axiom, and it reads this way if you translate it into the modus tollens. If multiple causes within slowly produce cardiovascular disease, then those normals who develop cardiovascular disease must display causal factors before and when they display cardiovascular disease. So it's the empirical axiom translated into the modus tollens, which of course it always can be. And this gives rise to those objectives, and it's the facts, it's factors, the facts that differ between the two groups. And they're factors because they're facts that acted. It's a brilliant choice of word. It's his choice. Okay, that's the objective. Here's the aims. There's the hypothetical structure. I don't need to read you the far left frame. This is what you already saw. Is it exactly as I've schematized? Yes. Will it always be? Actually, my proposal is yes. If you've done it right, yes, always. Will you have the kind of insight Dauber had? Unlikely. I've never had anything that good. Okay. Well, what happened? First thing that should dawn on you was 31 years later, 1981. Dauber has been elbowed aside. Canal moved himself into the directorship. Dauber ended up somewhere else, and Canal took over and so forth. That's academia. I say 31 years. The paper was submitted in 79. So, okay, knock off a couple years, 29 years, before they got the work done. What did they find? They found isolated systolic hypertension. That's what they meant by it. Today, you'd say, my God, that's a high systolic pressure. And that's a plenty high diastolic pressure, but at that time, this would have been considered on a threshold for high. The world had focused on the diastolic, and they already had this as part of the disease model. So systolic pressure seemed benign. It's just a function of age. What did they find? Well, first of all, this isolated systolic hypertension, it goes up precisely after the region where the diastolic mattered, right here. It goes up faster in women than men, which is something I never really knew till I studied this paper. They had a lot of people here. They have 5,000 to 6,000 people in these groups. There's plenty of data. What did they find? Well, this is a 2-year incidence rate of new cardiovascular disease onset in this group, 55 to 74. It's right here, this slice. 113 per 1,000 cases men, 50 per 1,000 cases women. The risk factor ratio is 3.5. This is big, really big. But this wasn't going to surprise anybody. This is the old disease model. It's age. The vessels stiffen. The systolic pressure goes up. You're just looking at aging. Okay. Well, here's your multivariable analysis. It's a logistic analysis between these groups. Those who didn't, is to get it, looking at the onset rate. Systolic pressure's got a nice coefficient, a nice t-value. P-value is highly significant here for men and women. What's this? Well, they used pulse wave to estimate the stiffness of the vessels because they knew the disease model, and they wanted to be able to separate whether the stiffness or the systolic pressure was doing it. It wasn't the stiffness. NS. It's the systolic pressure. You stiffen or you don't stiffen, but the systolic pressure is driving the disease. Wow. Well, okay, so what? Well, Popper would come along and say, you're ready now to progress the problem. The interim objective was to get some new causes. Identify new factors in normal people who go on to cardiovascular disease. Use the axiom of cause. Higher systolic pressure accompanies higher cardiovascular rates. Higher systolic pressure precedes higher vessel stiffness does not predict cardiovascular disease. It does not associate. And this was all empirical. And that leads to a new all statement. Systolic blood pressure greater than normal causes cardiovascular disease. If that's the case, then lowering systolic pressure less than or equal to normal is going to reduce stroke. They measured stroke. Not likely going to not, it would be a good idea, it must, or else this theory is dead. Well, they did it. What did they do? They counted strokes with and without drugs to lower systolic pressure, and the answer was yes. What did they do next? More drugs to lower systolic pressure. What did they do next? They treatment programs all over the world, and educated doctors lower systolic pressure. And now all of you who are listening to this, if you're doctors, you know this led to a planet-wide revolution. I'm old enough to have lived through the period where you never lowered the systolic pressure in an elderly person. It would have been considered malpractice. Were there follow-up trials to check on this, to verify this work? Yes. In a recent review, I saw 53 subsequent trials. And there may be even more before we're done. Many of them were looking at doses and kinds of drugs and dose combinations and how low it would be to go. You may know by now that the most recent trials say it's good to be below 135. In fact, it's good to be below 130. And you can't do trials to see if you do better below 130, you won't get enough strokes and heart attacks to even do a trial. Most doctors I know not only want to be below 130 systolic, they want to be below 120 systolic, like me. But that's, of course, guessing. This was a design, it was a simple design, wash-in period, where you would get them. These were the goals, that's what they wanted to achieve. They started with a long-acting diuretic, had this dose. If they didn't get their goals, they doubled it. If they did get their goals, they didn't. If they still didn't get their goal, they added a beta blocker, which is what they had at the time. And if that didn't work, they raised the dose until they got to where they wanted to go. A very simple design. It was carried out in 17 trial centers around the country. And Henry Black, who ran the Yale Center, told me in a personal conversation that more than half of the directors didn't want to do the trial. They thought this was going to kill a lot of older people. They thought there would be a scandal, and it was silly. They did it anyway. And this was the Shep trial. This is the Shep trial results. This is cumulative stroke rate per 100 people per year. Cumulative stroke, follow-up interval. It's a life table. P less than whatever, certainly significant. And this trial then triggered off many, 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 many more. And they all showed the same thing. It's good to lower systolic pressure. The more you lower it, the better. And then all the different drugs to lower it. Now, how would Thomas Kuhn have looked at this? Well, he would have said it's a scientific revolution. That's his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he would have said, well, the ruling paradigm was that only diastolic pressure caused cardiovascular disease. And that was true in young people. And it was a very important accomplishment. It gained adherence, and it ran normal science. In the course of normal science, in truly normal science, this empirical science that was done in Framingham, an anomaly occurred. This finding contradicted the ruling paradigm. The systolic pressure was a risk factor. That's not what the paradigm would predict. It did not in any way overcome the ruling paradigm. Doctors treated the same way. Science accepted that paradigm. But of course, once you have a major anomaly. Normal science can give way to extraordinary science, which attempts to falsify crucial predictions of the ruling paradigm and replace it. And that answer was yes. Both can cause the disease. Isolated systolic hypertension causes cardiovascular disease. Treat it. Treat it in the elderly, treat it in everybody. And so what happened here was what Kuhn called a scientific revolution. And it was a medical revolution. It changed medical practice. I was already running a nephrology section when this trial came out. And I watched as we all changed our approach to treatment. Now, this up till now has focused on the idea of cause, but there's a near universal multiplicity of causes in the disease. We looked at stroke, for example, in these trials, but age does have an individual risk factor effect. When you do proper studies of stroke rates, it goes up with age independent of systolic hypertension. Smoking is an independent variable. Diabetes are not as an independent variable. And of course, the systolic hypertension is a variable, and so is diastolic hypertension. And there's more, like genes, a bunch of question marks. So we counted strokes, we found a wonderful treatment, but there are many more. Hypertension itself has its cause in age, in genes, in smoking, maybe personality, in exercise or not, in diet sodium to potassium ratio, in obesity, in diabetes, and more. And diabetes, I'm only sketching here, genes, obesity, through sugar and insulin resistance on it. I didn't even scruple to fill all the rest in because there's such a massive range of causes. A call to your attention, getting away from the cardiovascular world. For 100 years, peptic ulcer was thought to be due to the acid pH of the stomach. The pH of the gastric fluid is 1. And it was pretty obvious that that would erode the mucosa of the stomach. Smoking seemed to make it worse. Type A personalities were said to make it worse. Age was said to make it worse, and so forth and so on. But that was the ruling paradigm. Antacids worked. They worked very well. But if you stopped them, the ulcers would recur. Bacteria were found in the stomach. Well, who in the world would have thought bacteria could live at pH 1? The original work was despised. It was disdained. The investigators who brought it up were disdained. Funding agencies wouldn't fund them. One funding agency had the nerve. Turned out they were true. There was a Nobel Prize. It's Helicobacter. And it's even bigger than gastric ulcer, peptic ulcer. It's probably gastric cancer. So you're going to expect multiple causes. You're going to expect them to come up out of nowhere. And that's the way it really works. So we're not done. This is just an interesting, what I've shown you is just an interesting, if glamorous, and wildly successful example of causal reasoning and causal investigating by scientists for society in the case of medicine. Let me kind of sum up by putting theory and empiricism side by side in the case that I showed you, the reduced cardiovascular disease. The original progress was made using the axiom of cause, the modus tollens, and empiricism. This was the brilliance of Dauber. And it all arose from the 7 words of Thomas Dauber. The objective and the specific aims linked through his marvelous hypothetical and gave rise to systolic pressure. And then the modus tollens was used in the standard way to test a theory about how the world worked, and it was tested. It looked just exactly like a standard experiment, and the answer was yes, and gave rise to a revolution. Now at this point I've sort of concluded what I came for. This is a new approach compared to my prior one. I like it a lot better. I think it's useful and valuable to people who like to do science. It's been valuable to me to think about it as a working scientist. And I hope whoever you are who've come have enjoyed it. Maybe it provoked some thinking. Maybe you found something wrong. If so, I would love to hear about it. I want to thank you very much for coming and listening to me. Let me remind you of the 7 beautiful words of Dauber. And with that, thank you again for coming, and say goodbye.